Supply Ron here. I got a new haircut and today we're reviewing Alizarin Crimson Permanent by SAA Paints. What's up, Liron here. Thank you for joining me in another episode of The Paint Show. And today, as I mentioned, we'll be looking at SAA Alizarin Crimson Permanent. I really loved this one from the previous video that I did on the trio that I will put a link somewhere here so you can check it out. This is the paint I wanted to tackle next and take a look at. And I stumbled upon some interesting things. So Chris Bushnall sent me this tube. Thank you so much once again, Chris. This is a 14 milliliter tube. SAA is a British, UK based brand of watercolor paints. They seem not to be as well known in the US. They are really great, and so far my experience with them was excellent. I really enjoy using these paints. This is a 14 millimeter tube. They don't have series in their line of paints at all, so all of the pricing is the same. You can be a member and then receive a discount on their website, I believe. Also, one more thing, these are all vegan or vegetarian. There are no animal products or byproducts in their paint, so that's a plus definitely if you're looking for that. Now, what I want to do is talk a bit about the stats of this particular paint and just compare it to another one that I found really interesting. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is rearrange the camera and we'll have a look at this and some information regarding this paint and this tube. So I want to go over some of the stats of this paint, but before that, let me just read to you the description on SAA's website. So they say, this versatile color is great for mixing with viridian hue to make beautiful greens, cooling down reds, or creating tones with depth and character. Okay, so very interesting red. Let me show you some of the information. So, Alizarin Crimson Permanent, the pigments used are PR177, so that's Anthraquinone red, and PV Dioxazine violet, okay? This is basically the equivalent of Daniel Smith's Carbazole Violet, which I already reviewed here. It's transparent and its lightfastness is A. Now this is very interesting because they also have another red that's called Alizarin Crimson and not Alizarin Crimson Permanent. Now the difference between them is questionable for me because I don't really understand it, but basically Alizarin Crimson uses the same PR177 but also PY83, okay, so that's diarylide yellow HR. It's also transparent, its lightfastness is also A, so it's a bit weird for me. The only difference is literally in the color itself. Now if you want to see what this may look like, I've got here the Alizarin Crimson Permanent that makes use of PR177. So I used PR178, which is quite similar, and that is Daniel Smith's Parylene Red, okay? So the Alizarin Crimson Permanent, which is the one I've got here, makes use of that and PV23, which is what we have here in the Daniel Smith's Carbazole Violet as well. Okay, and the other Alizarin Crimson, the non-permanent one, is the same PR177, but PY83. I used here to swatch this PY97, which is Hansa Yellow Medium, but this one's actually supposed to be Hansa Yellow Deep. It's still quite similar, so I did allow myself to use this. Now this is very interesting because looking at their website, these two reds seem to be, this one and the Alizarin Crimson seem to be quite similar, so it's hard for me to imagine how one is the product of this combo and another is the product of this that for me instinctively should create a more orange color. But in any case, that's interesting. I don't know. If you know the answer to that mystery, let me know in a comment below. But anyway, this is it in terms of the paint information. Now what I want to do is rearrange things and we will start playing around with the paint, doing some swatches and fun stuff. So I've got a nice plan for us here. The paper I'm using is Canson Montval Sketchbook, 300 gram. I want to show you what Alizarin Crimson Permanent looks like here, and then I will compare it to Daniel Smith's Quinacridone Rose and Winsor Newton Cotman's Alizarin Crimson, which I happen to have. I think it's really helpful to see the color in the context of other colors. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to have some wet and wet, some dry brush. We will recreate this paint using the mixes I showed you earlier, and finally we will show some blues and yellows mixes. Okay, so let's get started. Let me zoom in on this area. So we'll start with looking at the paint in its purest form. I've got it here on the palette. The brush I'm using is a silver black velvet, I'm always asked. So here we go. Let's see what this one looks like in its purest form. I'm gonna add some water to that. I want to post another video soon about blending, so just because it's something I always do actually when I do these episodes of the paint show. So anyway, let's start off here. Because I want to compare to these on the sides, what I'm going to do is start light and then slowly increase the consistency as I move downwards, okay? Now the way the paint behaves can also depend on paper. It actually greatly depends on the paper. So this will look a little different in different papers. Not in terms of the paint itself, but how it spreads out across the paper, things like this. So now I'm using quite a thick mixture. Let me dry the brush now, and I'm gonna use the paint almost opaquely with no water in the brush, okay? So almost as if I'm painting with, I don't know, gouache or something. So this is the paint in its purest form, right here. Now I think what I'll do now is already do the comparison so you can see what this looks like compared to the other paints. So I'm gonna start out with Daniel Smith's quinacridone rose that I've got here, okay? I don't want to burden you with taking a look at this palette, so I'm just gonna use it, okay? So I'm gonna start with quite a wet wash, and you can hopefully see the difference. It's hard for me, honestly, to tell what the difference is. I think this one just leans more towards the pink, and this one's more red, I guess. It's hard to tell exactly what the mixture is. Maybe this one has a little more blue in it also. I'm really not sure. So in any case, I'm just gonna move downwards with this one and hopefully compare what they look like. It's a bit contaminated here on the left by some blue, but what you see on the right is the purest pigment. So where it's close to this, and you can see the comparison, it's the purest one. So this is the Daniel Smith quinacridone rose, and finally I want us to look at Winsor Newton Alizarin Crimson, which I've got here. It is contaminated, so I'm going to clean it thoroughly just to make sure that you see it in its purest form. And also, regardless of the fact that it's quite contaminated, there's another issue with that, and that is that it's a Winsor Newton Cotman, and Cotmans aren't necessarily the best when it comes to pigmentation. Although this red, to be fair, is quite well pigmented. So let me show you what this looks like. And I'm gonna have to work a little harder to get a darker value with this one, just because it's a cheaper tube, cheaper brand, but it's still decent. It actually, all of the first few months I did with these paints, and I remember getting them, and they were really good. So this one is much more similar to SAA's Alizarin Crimson. You can see there's a huge difference between the quinacridone rose. I'm not even sure why I chose that one. It's just what appeared to me to be the closest that I got. Okay, so this wraps up our just swatches and comparison. What I'm gonna do now is some wet and wet. So let me switch the brush here, and I'm gonna switch to my Museum Emerald brush. It's not one that I use a lot. It is good because it's flat, so I can use it for some things that make it a little more comfortable to use, but for the most part I'm not necessarily a big fan of flat brushes, and the reason why is that I don't like to change brushes during the painting process, and I do like to get a fine tip, so I just resort to using a round brush with a point that I can use in a versatile manner, although I do see a lot of people using this in a really versatile manner, so I guess it's definitely possible with the sharp edges. So anyway, this paper is not that textured, by the way, and I think you can see this. So now you can see hopefully the sheen here. You see the water. This is wet. So I'm gonna do the wet in wet. So we'll get the Alizarin Crimson here, and we'll just start dropping it in here and seeing how it behaves and how it reacts. I don't usually do these kinds of things unless it's for a video. I'm not that much of an experimentation type of guy. When it comes to painting, I just paint. I like to paint scenes, to paint stuff. I don't play around with paint a lot, so this is really nice. It's like therapy to me, the episodes of the paint show. So it's also for me, it's my opportunity to zoom in maybe on one particular paint and learn how to use it in certain ways or how it reacts. I don't really nerd out on pigments on my own. I'm actually a big fan of the limited palette, as some of you know. I'm not a big fan of spending a lot of money on many different paints, unless of course it comes in a set, and it's not even the money that's the issue, it's more the, I think, perception, or the idea that you don't need a lot of different paints to create a beautiful painting. All you need is some few paints that you can mix out of. And it's also easier to keep the color harmony intact when you have a limited palette relatively. So now I'm going to go back to my silver black velvet, and I'm going to do some dry brush strokes. So I didn't really leave a lot of room for that, but I'm just going to do it. So I'm going to grab some paint relatively thick and just apply it like that. And see what I get. So there's not a lot of texture, as I mentioned, so you won't get a very textured result. If you're struggling with getting a texture because the paper is not as rough or cold pressed, what you can do is just lower the angle of the brush, and this will usually lead to results that are a little more showing of the paper's texture, okay? So this is, in the end, I will zoom in on everything and let you see it more up close, okay? So don't worry about that. So what I'm gonna do now is try and recreate it, and this is a part I'm really happy and excited about. So the way to recreate this particular one is by mixing the PR177, which is Anthraquinone red, and the PV23, which is the Dioxazine violet, I believe. Violet, was it? Yes. So this is, generally speaking, a mixture of, let me show you here, a mixture of the Perylene red that I showed you earlier, together with the Carbazole violet. So this is what I'm going to do, and hopefully we can achieve a similar result. So I'm going to use an empty well here. I'm going to just drop down some of the Perylene red, and to that I'm going to add some of the violet. So let's see what we get here, and I'm mixing it on purpose on the palette, and it may be a really different result, by the way. So now it's way towards the violet. I'm gonna add a bit more of the red here, make it a little happier, and I don't expect it to be similar because I am using different pigments, and these things matter, okay? So I probably won't get the same result. So now the violet is very dominant, so I'm adding a lot of red here, and maybe I'll be able to push it back in the right direction. Okay, so this looks a little closer to this paint here. Hopefully you can see this. Let's add a bit more red, because I think still we need more red dominance in the mixture. So this one looks a little similar. Let me just put a kind of a line here so you can see this, okay? So this makes sense. This is kind of the mixture that they're using. A little different. I'm improvising here. I'm always improvising, and that's a good thing, because I don't think you necessarily have all these paints, so it's a good exercise to try and recreate it with what you have. So this is basically the way to recreate this one. If you have these other paints that are fairly common, then you can do that. If you have the Daniel Smith primary and secondary set, you have all the colors you need, basically. So now let's do some blue mixes. So I'm gonna add just a bit of French ultramarine here, and I'm using French ultramarine by SAA as well. Let's see what we get. It's funny because we get something that pushes it a little closer to the violet. So I'm gonna put a bit more blue here, so you can see the range. The range is interesting here. And finally, I'm gonna add a bit more of the alizarin. So there you have it. This is with French ultramarine. Now let me put a bit of let's go with like phthalo blue or something really cool. So I'm gonna put it in here. it's fairly pure. And I'm gonna add a bit of the alizarin, and let's see what we get. So we get a very different result. I think this one neutralizes a little more, which makes sense, just because of the differences in the paint. I find generally that phthalo blue tends to neutralize a lot of the reds a little more, just because it has, I think, more, this is the green shade, so it has a bit of yellow in it, so you get a mix that is not just blue and red, but it's actually blue-red and the added yellow of the phthalo blue. So now let's look at this with some yellows. So first off, let's take some of that pure Alizarin Crimson, and I'm gonna add just a bit of cadmium yellow, sorry. So this is what we get. Let's mix it a bit on the palette. Because I showed you some of these mixes, I don't want to necessarily waste too much time on that. So this is what we get with a warm yellow. And now this is a mixture I still haven't gotten the chance to try out myself even. So that will be the Hansa Yellow Light, I think, here. Or kind of a lemony yellow. And let's add to that the alizarin. This actually tends to create very interesting golds from what I remember. So we have this one, let's just mix it a bit here on the palette. So it's a very beautiful orangey gold. Actually, I prefer this one over this one. It's funny that the paint that I prefer less produces a better mixture when it comes to reds, and I see this consistently. The cooler yellows produce a more beautiful gold or orange than the warm yellows. So anyway, this is it. Let me zoom out so you can see everything, and then I'm gonna zoom in on it. So I'm going to briefly conclude. We've got here the Alizarin Crimson Permanent in the center, then compared to Daniel Smith's Quinacridone Rose and to Winsor Newton Cotman Alizarin Crimson. We did some wet and wet, we did some dry brush, we tried recreating it, we didn't get as happy a result as we could probably. I think this needs more Perlin red, or alternatively more Anthraquinone red, which is the original part of the mixture in this one, in the one we're looking at. And finally, we've got some blue mixes, some yellow mixes, and I really hope you enjoyed this one. I'm gonna grab the camera and show you this really up close. Okay, so sometimes people want to see all of the details, so here you go. Hopefully you can see this much better that way. I'm not really, again, a kind of experimentation, messing around with colors kind of person. I really just paint. But when I get these chances to enjoy the paint and to share it with you, then it's really good for me and for my learning experience as well. Here you go. You can see some of the dry brush technique here. And this is it. I think we can wrap up this video. So this is, friends, I really enjoyed reviewing this paint for you. Definitely check out their website. I'm not sure exactly where they ship, but I hope to get some more of these in the future, probably ones that will complement the ones I have. I did see that they sell them in sets as well, so that's probably worth taking a look at. And this is it again. Really enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your ongoing support on this channel. I just hit 14K subscribers, which is amazing. Like, I really remember I just hit the 10K, and it just keeps going on and on. Your support means a lot to me. I am trying to get to as many people as possible and hopefully improve my videos and my content and the way I produce these videos and what I'm teaching, and trying to be on the cutting edge of watercolor, basically, to provide a huge resource that will help a lot of people and also inspire and encourage people to create with more courage, with more freedom, be less shy about their abilities, and really share them freely with the world. So everything really helps, all of your support. If you do want to support me and get some more exclusive updates and things I don't share anywhere else, be sure to check out my Patreon page. The link will be in the description box below, alongside the website of SAA, by the way. On my Patreon page, you can get basically more personal updates and reviews and self-critique of my own paintings that I share only there, and also video sneak peeks and previews before anyone else gets to know what I'm doing and what I'm planning. So if you want to support me, it's like $1 a month or $5 a month. Definitely check it out. I will put a link again in the description box below. Thank you so much, and I will see you again in another episode of The Paint Show and in another vid real soon.